Hello and welcome to MIP TV, and with me in this section is TA Made Simple, where I'm joined by Bob Cook, who's a TA therapist, a transactional analysis therapist, a TA therapist, and he makes the complex ideas in TA simple. We've been looking at the different schools, and this school is called the Integrative School, isn't it? And it was developed by Richard Erskine.
Correct. It's the fourth school, if we go chronologically from the classical, which is 1961 to 1970. Then there was the death of Eric Byrne. We had the emergence of two schools, the Shifting School, which I talked about, I think, last video, and the Redecision School, which was just before that, which occupied the 70s. Then in the 80s, Richard Erskine had been writing quite a lot during the 1980s with his wife, Rebecca Troutman, on the ideas of integration being the emphasis of cure within transaction analysis, rather than, say, treatment of the parent ego state or treatment of the child ego state or strengthening the adult. Richard Erskine talked a lot, and many of his articles reflected this, that integration was the cure. So he was writing about that, and in the late 80s, he developed his methodology of how to work towards integration and his definition of integrative psychotherapy. And hence, I think it was 1998, came the ideas for the association to be born, the International Association of Integrative Psychotherapy. And I think his first conference was 2000. And then there's been a conference every 2 years since then.
Yeah, it is a relatively new school. And what really confused the hell out of me, Bob, was that I wondered when we think of integrative counselling and psychotherapy, we usually think of one mode and another mode joined together, integrated. This isn't the case in this, isn't it? Integrative in this case means something else, doesn't it?
Yeah. So when in 1985, I did my first counselling course in Abraham Moss, North Manchester College, and it wasn't a very good counselling course, but it was about 20 weeks. A word which is sort of a buzzword at that time, it was eclectic.
Yes.
In other words, the taking toolboxes from many of the different modes around. And I think nowadays, in 2018, 35 years later, when people often call themselves integrative psychotherapists, it's really the new word for what I was preached to in 1985 was eclectic.
Yes.
So often I think that. But in case of Richard Erskine,
yes,
he's talking about a different dimension. He talks about, you're quite right, but borrowing like eclectic thinking, borrowing from different influences, Gestalt psychotherapy, existential psychotherapy, psychodynamic psychotherapy, transactional analysis therapy. So these influences, if you like, and integrating these influences, if you like, is one dimension, which I think is more of a eclectic version. But the other style of the other thinking about integrative psychotherapy is that the therapist is working to help the person integrate the different fragmented, disowned parts of the self into a cohesive whole.
Yes. Yes, and I think this is something that it really tripped me up, Bob, because when I thought of it, I was just asking people, I couldn't get my head around it at all. It was like, well, it's integrative, so it must draw on other approaches. Well, yes, it does. And I became to realise through your help and colleagues' help that actually this was as much about helping the client reclaim themselves than it was about the mode of therapy used to do it.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. And his basic personality model is transaction analysis, parent, adult, child. Though he wrote the new methods, if you like, of working with the PAC model towards integration, that's inquiry, attunement, involvement. The sort of basic is still ideas about personality comes from transaction analysis.
Yeah. So how would a TA therapist work using if they were an integrative Erskineite, if I could use that?
So 2000, let's say let's say 2000 onwards, but we could say, when the organization was formed, or we could even go back. But that type of animal, an integrative relational transactional analyst, if you want to use that word, would focus on integration as the cure, right? Okay. Rather than, that means taking back, as you just said it,
Yeah.
helping the person take back the cut off parts of the self, reclaiming the self to a cohesive, whole, or integrating adult, if you want to use that word, rather than the focus being on strengthening the adult ego states, or replacement parenting, or the redecision in the child, which is, the emphasis from the other schools, if you like. But the emphasis here will be the client will be reclaiming parts of themselves in the service of integration.
Yes, to make themselves whole again. So the idea would be that the client would maybe a bit like a cake with a piece missing, and the idea would be that through the arc of the therapy, they replace that missing piece of the cake to be a whole thing. I'm using a visual cue here, not suggesting for a minute that clients are cakes, but it's a useful visual, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So it's very different from Burns' use of transaction or focus of transaction analysis of the classical school.
Yes.
60, which is strengthening the adult ego state.
Yeah, I mean, we talked before about Burns' original model being more of a cognitive model and going to the board, and he said that you're not doing it properly unless you've gone to the board, a whiteboard 3 or 4 times to teach the model.
More educated.
Yeah, but in this model, this is more about the therapist becoming. It's more about the relationship, isn't it?
Much more about using the relationship between the therapist and the client in order for integration. And integration means helping the person reclaim the lost parts of the self into an organizing whole.
Yeah, and when I think of that, I think of obviously the work of Rogers, because attunement and the therapeutic relationship were all part of developing what we talk of in the humanistic world, the organismic self. And it's quite interesting because TA is a tripartite model, parent, adult, and child. But there seems to be a tripartite model within a circle, because it's the whole thing.
In a way, I mean, yes, it's really interesting because about 5 or 6 years ago, I talked to Richard about this. Sorry, Richard Erskine, and I said, if I was to draw this integrating adult or this integrating whole, I would probably draw it just as you just said it.
Yeah.
There on camera. And he said, "Oh, Bob," he said, "that's a nice way of drawing it." I think that's what he said. And then he went off to describe contaminations and a different type of thinking. But that's the way I see it as well.
Yeah, so just on a very basic level, it seems to be drawing the tripartite personality model that Byrne developed from Freud. So the id, the ego, and the superego, and he kind of redesigned it. And then he's using the more humanistic ideas of the wholeness of someone.
Yeah.
To make these two ideas, it sounds like he's put them together, because I know that Richard Erskine's supervisor was Carl Rogers' supervisor, I think.
Richard Erskine, Alice, is interesting. Richard Erskine used to say, my supervisor worked on the same corridor as Carl Rogers, and I can't remember the university Richard said. So Richard Erskine had, I think it was David Kupman, but I can't swear about that. But whoever this person is, and I think it might well have been David Kupman, was actually worked on the same floor as Carl Rogers.
How fascinating. So there is a connection there, and it wouldn't be too far of a jump to say that they probably talked and shared ideas. And
Richard, if he was here, listen to me, would say to Roy that one of his biggest heroes was Carl Rogers.
There we go. So it's really, really interesting how those two approaches have been joined together. A fusion would be the best word, I think.
Well, I think Richard Erskine, as I said earlier on, drew from many different influences.
Yes.
Carl Rogers is a really big one.
Yes.
I didn't know that word that you talked about, or say it again, or
organismic self.
yeah, but that would fit into his way of thinking of
Yes.
reclaiming the parts of the self into the whole.
How fascinating. So we're really moving along now in the kind of ideas and the schools of transactional analysis. The next one is going to be an even closer approximation, isn't it, to this?
Yeah. The next one's going to be the Relational School of Transaction Analysis, 2008, by and that was formed. Well, I say it was originated by Helena Hargaden and Charlotte Sills.
Yes.
And also the people that surrounded those two people like Keith Tudor.
Yes.
Graham Sumner's.
Yeah.
Those together believed in co-creative transaction analysis, but were in a writing club with Helena Hargaden and Charlotte Sills, who went to write the famous book Relational Transaction Analysis and create this new school.
Yes, and that's really interesting, and maybe we'll talk about the huge piece of research that generated that idea. There's a huge piece of research in 2008, I think, which kind of gave the understanding that the relationship was the key in outcomes for clients, in good outcomes for clients.
Yeah, and also how you use the relationship. Because Richard Erskine, if he was here, would say, yes, I use the relationship in present day, but I also address the relationship in the past in the reparative sense.
Yes, in other words, supporting the vulnerable part of the client as a parent would, not being a parent, but the aspects of a parent which is being supportive and
transfers.
Yeah.
And the Relational School, when I'm going to talk, and that's what we talk about. Oh yes, but we still understand the concept of transference, but we're talking about reworking the transference in the here and now between the client and the therapist, rather than going back to a past transferential relationship.
Yes, using transference as a way of supporting emotional development.
Correct. Yeah, so it'll be an interesting video. I'm looking forward to talking. So I'm going to not talk any more about it, otherwise we'll have no video.
We'll give the game away.
It's a really interesting school.
Yeah, we won't tune in. We know it now. They've told us everything. So
well, I've got some gems left, Rory.
Oh well, I'm sure you have, Bob. So we've talked today about the integrative school, and as I say, in the next episode, and you must tune in for that. We're going to be talking about the relational school. Hit subscribe, hit the little bell at the top to get a reminder, and as always, Bob, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rory.